I went in with all humility going, you know what, this is going to be a tough challenge. I'm not going to brag about anything that I'm going to do.
There are moments in life that change everything. Not because of what is said in public but because of what's discovered in private. And on that cold morning inside the courthouse, the Brown family's entire world tilted. When a single confidential letter surfaced from Robyn Brown, sealed years ago, it didn't just reopen old wounds. It exposed every hidden scar. The air inside the courtroom was thick enough to choke on. Reporters whispered into their phones. Camera flashes burned through the room like lightning bolts. But even all that noise couldn't drown the quiet dread that hung over Kody Brown's face. He sat there at the defendant's table, his hands trembling over old papers and divorce filings that felt less like documents and more like gravestones. This wasn't a man fighting for money or custody or image. This was a man staring down the ruins of everything he had built in front of the world. Across from him sat Janelle Brown, calm, still, and unflinching. Her silence wasn't weakness. It was the kind of silence that follows after years of shouting into storms that never listened. Beside her stood her daughter, the quiet embodiment of pain turned into strength. And just a few rows behind, clutching a tissue in one hand and a trembling water bottle in the other, sat Robyn Brown. Her eyes darted across the courtroom, toward Kody, toward Janelle, toward the judge, as though she knew what was about to happen. But she did. This wasn't just another sister-wives argument played out for the cameras. This was the reckoning. The judge's gavel echoed through the room like thunder breaking a fragile peace. "Order in the court," she said, her voice cold but steady. The chatter stopped. The air froze. Even time seemed to pause to listen. Then it began. Janelle's attorney rose from his chair, his expression unreadable. He carried a slim brown folder. Nothing dramatic, nothing flashy. But inside that folder was a single letter. One piece of paper that would rip the curtain off the Brown family forever. "Your Honor," he said, his voice echoing against the oak-paneled walls, "we ask to admit this letter into evidence." The judge leaned forward, curious but cautious. "What's its relevance to the case?" The lawyer adjusted his glasses, calm and deliberate. "This," he said, holding it up, "is a handwritten letter from Robyn Brown to Mr. Kody Brown. Authenticated, dated. It was never shown to the co-wives. And its contents are deeply troubling. We believe it played a major role in the collapse of the Brown family." A ripple of gasps swept through the courtroom. Robyn's face went pale, her lips trembling. Kody's body stiffened as if he'd just been struck by a wave of memory and regret. And Janelle, she didn't move. She didn't flinch. Because deep down she'd been waiting for this truth to surface for years. The judge hesitated, then nodded. "Proceed." The lawyer unfolded the letter carefully, like it was an ancient relic pulled from the ashes of a broken home. The paper was yellowed, its edges curled with time, its ink slightly faded, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Graceful. Loopy. Robyn's. He began to read. And as his voice filled the courtroom, the silence became unbearable. "Dear Kody, I don't know how much longer I can pretend everything's fine. You see it too, the way the others look at me. With resentment. Suspicion. I tried to love them. I swear I did. But I don't belong with them. I belong with you. Maybe that's the real problem. I'm tired of sacrificing our peace for their comfort. I'm tired of asking permission to be near you. If I've become the villain in their story, then maybe I should stop apologizing. If it's me or them, please Kody, choose peace. Choose me." The judge's pen froze midair. A murmur rippled through the gallery. And Robyn, shaking, hid her face in her hands. Kody sat motionless, his eyes glassy, his knuckles white. He didn't need to say anything. Everyone in that room saw it, the guilt written across his face. This was no longer about faith or family or even love. This was about betrayal laid bare for the world to see. The lawyer set the letter down on the evidence table and spoke again, his tone quiet but firm. "For the record," he said, "this letter predates Janelle's separation by 18 months. It also predates Garrison's passing, and the final unraveling of the family bond. It clearly indicates Mrs. Robyn Brown's intention to separate herself and Mr. Brown from the rest of the family." The judge leaned back slowly, eyes narrowed in disbelief. Robyn shook her head, tears spilling silently down her cheeks. But the damage was already done. Every camera lens zoomed in. Every whisper became a roar. Every suppressed suspicion that the sister wives world had harbored for years had just been confirmed. And in that moment, Kody Brown wasn't a husband. He wasn't a father. He wasn't even a patriarch anymore. He was simply a man cornered by the truth. He lowered his gaze to the floor, the weight of years pressing down on him, decisions made in pride, words spoken in anger, and the silent loyalty of women who had given him everything only to be left behind. Janelle's expression remained still, but inside her, emotions clashed like storms, pain, anger, and an eerie sense of justice. The letter wasn't a surprise to her. It was a confirmation. For years she'd felt the shift, the way Robyn had slowly become Kody's world while the rest of them faded into the background. She'd watched her marriage dissolve not through fights or betrayal, but through neglect. And now, with the evidence spread across the courtroom table, the truth had finally taken form. Reporters scribbled notes furiously. Someone in the back gasped audibly. The judge glanced toward Kody, who now looked like a man seeing his reflection for the first time. "Mr. Brown," she said softly, "do you wish to respond?" Kody didn't move. His voice, when it came, was barely a whisper. "No, Your Honor." And that was the quietest confession of guilt the courtroom had ever heard. Because in that single line, no angry denial, no justification, he said everything. He knew the letter was real. He knew it was true. He knew it was the moment the illusion finally shattered. As the judge called for a recess, the crowd erupted. Robyn clung to her attorney, sobbing quietly. Janelle stood tall, not triumphant but resolute. For years she had watched her family break apart, piece by piece, and every time she'd been told to stay quiet, to keep the peace, to endure. Now she finally had proof that the peace had been a lie all along. Kody gathered his papers with trembling hands, but the courtroom wasn't watching him anymore. They were watching a man's kingdom crumble, and the women he had underestimated rise from its ruins. And somewhere deep inside him, Kody Brown understood that this wasn't just about a letter. It was about years of silence, sacrifice, and emotional exile finally demanding to be heard. When the cameras flashed once more, Janelle turned to the door, her daughter at her side. No tears, no words. Just quiet resolve, the kind that says, "I've waited long enough for the truth." And as Robyn sat in the back, clutching her letter like a relic of a life she could no longer defend, the truth was unmistakable. The Brown family wasn't falling apart anymore. It was already gone. The courtroom hadn't breathed in minutes. That letter, those words, still hung in the air like the scent of rain after a storm, heavy and unforgettable. The silence was deafening, broken only by the quiet shuffling of papers and the pounding heartbeat echoing through every person in the room. And then Kody Brown finally moved. His chair creaked against the floor, the small sound slicing through the stillness like a blade. He hadn't planned to speak, but something inside him cracked open, the pressure of secrets too long buried. "It was never meant to be discovered," he muttered almost to himself. But those 6 words were enough to send a shiver across the entire courtroom. Because they told everyone exactly what they needed to know. He had hidden it. The judge straightened, her eyes sharp as steel. "Mr. Brown," she said firmly, "you will speak only when asked to." But it was too late. The words were out. And once spoken, they couldn't be taken back. The cameras zoomed in, the reporters leaned forward, the air turned electric. Robyn trembled visibly now, her knuckles white around a tissue, her lawyer whispering something she didn't even hear. Across the room, Janelle sat completely still, expressionless, but inside something fierce was stirring. And Madison, her daughter, couldn't hold it in anymore. Her jaw tightened, her voice low but sharp enough to pierce through the courtroom noise. "You manipulated us all," she whispered under her breath, but the microphones caught it. The words echoed through the room, tiny but explosive. The judge's gavel came down with a firm knock. Order. But there was no order left. The calm had been destroyed the moment that letter came to light. The judge took a slow breath, trying to regain control. "Does the plaintiff wish to make a statement regarding this letter?" she asked. Janelle stood up. No notes. No hesitation. Her voice was low, measured, but every syllable carried years of silence, pain, and quiet endurance. "Proof of what I always knew," she said, turning her gaze toward Kody. "You didn't stumble into this, Kody. You chose it. You made your decision, you just never had the courage to say it out loud." Kody didn't move. Didn't blink. He looked smaller somehow, the weight of guilt pressing him into his seat. Janelle turned her eyes to Robyn, her tone steady but cutting through the air like glass. "And you," she said softly, "you wanted more than love, didn't you? You wanted to be the last one standing." Robyn's lower lip trembled, her eyes welling up with tears. She didn't speak. She couldn't. Janelle took a step forward, not in anger but in truth. "You could have told us," she said. "We were your sisters. You could have been honest. But instead you wrote secret letters, hid them, and watched us fall apart while you got exactly what you wanted." A gasp rippled through the gallery. Even the judge had to raise her hand. "That's all for now, Mrs. Brown," she said. "You'll have your full statement in the next session." Janelle nodded quietly and sat down, her expression unreadable. But the silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was suffocating. You could feel betrayal floating in the air like smoke in a closed room. The judge looked around slowly, as though measuring the gravity of what had just happened. This wasn't just about a marriage anymore. This was about an empire built on shared love and loyalty, collapsing under the weight of favoritism, secrecy, and unspoken resentment. And now that darkness, the one the family had hidden behind smiles and television cameras, was out in the open, raw and unforgiving. Even after the letter had been read in the previous session, the emotional wreckage lingered. People didn't know whether to cry, gasp, or look away. But they couldn't. They couldn't look away from Robyn Brown. Because right now, in that wooden chair under the fluorescent courtroom lights, she wasn't the polished, poised woman fans had known on television. She looked fragile, eyes red, cheeks streaked with tears, fingers trembling in her lap. And everyone knew that what she said next would decide everything. Her lawyer stood beside her, voice low but confident. "Your Honor," he said, "Mrs. Robyn Brown would like to provide a statement regarding the letter." The judge nodded, expression neutral but curious. "You may proceed." Robyn stood slowly, almost as if the weight of the moment was pushing her down. In one hand she held a tissue. In the other, a copy of the letter that had turned her life into a public trial. She didn't look at Janelle. She didn't look at Kody. She looked at the floor like she was hoping the truth might somehow rise from it and defend her. Her voice trembled as she began. "I wrote this letter 2 years ago," she said. "I was overwhelmed, exhausted, and lost. I felt rejected by everyone around me. I didn't feel like part of the family anymore." The courtroom stayed silent. You could almost hear the sound of her heartbeat in the microphone. "I remember that night," Robyn continued, swallowing hard. "Kody had just come home after days with the other households. I was alone, crying, feeling like I was always in the middle of something I never started but couldn't escape." She paused, looked at the judge, who gave a quiet nod to continue. "So I wrote," Robyn said, her voice breaking slightly. "Not to manipulate, not to hurt anyone, but to survive. I poured everything I was feeling onto that paper. And I never thought anyone else would see it but him." Kody lifted his head for the first time, but Robyn didn't look up. Her eyes stayed fixed on the letter in her hands. "The words I used," she said quietly, "they were raw. They were selfish. And I know that now." She took a deep breath and began reading from the letter again, her own handwriting trembling between her fingers. "Kody," she read, voice barely steady, "I know they'll never love me the way you do." Her voice cracked. "That wasn't meant to insult anyone," she said quickly. "It was heartbreak. I wanted to be loved. I wanted us to be close. But deep down I think we all knew it was too late." The courtroom hung on every word. Robyn turned the page. "I never wanted them to hurt," she continued, "but I also won't give you up." The words hit like thunder. You could see people in the gallery physically reacting, hands covering mouths, heads shaking, eyes wide. Janelle didn't move, didn't blink. But behind her calm, her silence screamed louder than anything Robyn could say. Robyn clutched the paper tighter, her hands shaking. "I didn't mean it like an ultimatum," she whispered. "I just didn't know how to lose him without losing myself. I didn't realize how much being close to Kody was taking away from everyone else." Her words softened into a confession, almost like she was speaking to herself. "I didn't know," she said, "that I had become the symbol of everything falling apart." She flipped back to the first page, eyes glistening. "I can't be the villain in their story anymore," she read. "If it's me or them, I hope you'll choose peace even if that means leaving the rest behind." A collective gasp filled the room again. It was the sentence that changed everything. For years, fans, family, and even the wives themselves had replayed this invisible moment in their minds, trying to understand when exactly the family began to crumble. Now they had the answer, written in Robyn's own hand. That was the moment Kody made his choice. Not in words. Not in public. But in silence. And now that silence was finally speaking louder than any defense he could give. The silence after Robyn's trembling words was deafening. The courtroom sat suspended in a kind of breathless awe, like time itself had stopped to witness what came next. No gavel struck. No murmur filled the space. Just the raw, humming tension that clung to the air like dust in sunlight. And at the center of it all sat Janelle Brown, still unreadable, her posture perfectly straight, her face calm, but her eyes? They burned. They burned with years of grief, betrayal, and the quiet kind of rage that only comes from being ignored for far too long. She didn't speak at first. He didn't need to. The look alone was enough to pierce through the room like a blade. Kody sat just a few feet away, hands folded tight, eyes cast downward like a man who had built his own cage and now couldn't bear to look at its bars. And when Janelle finally opened her mouth, her voice was soft, so soft that everyone had to lean in to hear it. But that softness made it all the more terrifying. "I asked you for the truth, Kody," she said. The words didn't echo, but somehow they reached every corner of the room. "I pleaded with you to give me a genuine reason why you left us. Not excuses. Not religion. Not schedules. Just the truth." Kody's jaw clenched, but his gaze didn't lift. The man who once commanded every room he entered couldn't even meet her eyes now. "I deserved it," she continued. "We all did." She lifted the letter in her hand, that letter, the one that had been hidden away for years like a dirty secret. It trembled slightly in her grip, but her voice didn't. "And this is what you chose to hide." She raised the paper high enough for everyone to see. "This piece of paper," she said, "this collection of words, this is the truth I begged you for. And you kept it locked away in a drawer. You let us crumble while you guarded it like treasure." The judge said nothing. The audience didn't even shift. Even the cameras outside the courtroom seemed to freeze, as though they too understood they were witnessing something sacred and tragic. Janelle turned then, slowly, and fixed her eyes on Robyn. "You didn't destroy this family," she said, her tone as calm as a still lake. "Kody did." A soft gasp broke from somewhere in the gallery, but Janelle didn't flinch. "But you," she continued, her voice slicing through the quiet like glass, "you helped him do it. Maybe not with intention. Maybe not with malice. But your silence, your quiet smiles, your refusal to speak when you knew the truth, that's what finished us." Robyn's hand shot to her mouth. A sob broke from her chest. She started shaking her head, tears streaming freely now, shoulders trembling with every breath. But Janelle didn't stop. "Do you have any idea," she demanded, her voice cracking just slightly, "what it feels like to watch your children cry on Christmas because their father didn't even call? Do you know how many birthdays I covered for you, Kody? How many times I told them you were busy when the truth was you had moved on?" Her breath hitched, but she didn't crumble. "Do you know what it's like," she whispered, "to lie to your own children so they don't hate their father?" Kody's eyes flickered, but he still didn't speak. The silence in his chest was louder than anything Janelle could have screamed. "I defended you," she said. "I defended your reputation, your choices, your absences, for years. I told myself maybe one day you'd come back, maybe the man who once held our babies in his arms would remember who he was." A tear slipped down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. "But now," she breathed, voice growing heavy with years of swallowed pain, "I finally understand what actually happened." She lowered her gaze to the letter, unfolding it like a sacred relic, and began to read. "If it's me or them, I hope you'll choose peace, even if it means letting go of everything else." Her eyes lifted again, straight at Kody. "And you did," she said. The room went still. Kody's eyes closed. For the first time his face broke. Just barely, a flicker of guilt, a shadow of regret. But he said nothing. Janelle took a deep breath. That deep, tired kind of breath you take when your soul has run out of places to hide. "I could have lived with the truth," she said softly. "What I couldn't live with was your cowardice. You didn't end this family like a man. You let it rot. Slowly. Silently. One ignored phone call at a time." Tears began to stream down her cheeks, but she stood tall. You made us question our worth, Kody. You made our children wonder if they did something wrong. And all the while, you played happy husband to your favorite wife, smiling for the cameras, telling the world we were angry and dramatic. She reached into her folder and pulled out a small laminated sheet, a screenshot, creased but protected. Do you remember Garrison's last message to you? She asked. Kody's face twitched. He didn't answer. So Janelle read it herself. Dad, we miss you, but you only show up when it's convenient. I won't beg anymore. I just want peace for Mom and the rest of us. The air changed. A wave of sorrow moved through the courtroom like wind over an open field. Even the judge's stoic expression faltered. Janelle's hands shook slightly as she lowered the sheet. That's what your son wrote before he stopped calling, she said, her voice trembling but fierce. Before he decided it hurt less to let you go than to keep hoping. Robyn covered her face, sobbing. Kody's head hung low, his shoulders trembling now under the weight of it all. Janelle turned to the judge. Your Honor, she said softly, this isn't about money. It's not about revenge. It's not even about a reputation. It's about accountability. My children were abandoned. Their truth was buried so their father could keep pretending he was a hero. Her voice caught again, but she pushed through. He got to play house with one wife while the rest of us were made out to be villains. And I'm done letting that stand. She pointed toward the back of the courtroom. Two of her grown sons sat side by side, their faces streaked with tears. These are the boys he left behind, she said, her voice cracking for the first time. They grew up thinking they weren't enough, that they did something wrong. That maybe if they had been quieter, better, more understanding, their dad would have stayed. She turned back to Kody. But it wasn't them, she said. It was you. You left us. You rewrote the story. And for years we let you because we loved you. Because we hoped one day you'd tell the truth. The courtroom stayed still as she took one last step forward. But today, she said quietly, I'm done protecting you. Her tone shifted, no longer pleading, no longer trembling. It was steel now, sharp and final. You don't get to rewrite history anymore. You don't get to tell people we abandoned you. You abandoned us. You made your choice, and this, she lifted the letter again, was your confession. You just didn't have the courage to admit it. Robyn sobbed harder. Kody's face was pale, motionless, his eyes glistening as if holding back a storm that had come too late. Janelle's last words fell into the silence like the closing note of a requiem. And Robyn, she whispered, her voice almost tender, I hope someday you realize what your silence cost. Not just me. Not just the other wives. But the children. The innocent ones who only ever wanted a family. The judge leaned forward slightly, voice barely above a whisper. Court will recess for 10 minutes. But no one moved. No one could. The gavel finally struck. A single sharp crack that seemed to echo through every corner of the courtroom and through every broken heart inside it. The 10-minute recess had stretched into 30, but when the judge returned, nothing about the energy in the room had changed. The tension still lived there, thick, unmoving, like a fog that refused to clear. Kody sat motionless. His hands trembled just slightly on the table. A man who had spent years speaking for the cameras and now couldn't find a single word. Robyn sat beside him, her eyes red, her face pale and wet. She clutched a folded tissue that looked like it had long since given up. Janelle stood quietly in the front row, hands clasped in front of her, her children behind her like quiet shadows of strength. The judge's voice broke through the silence. I have reviewed the statements, the evidence, and the testimony provided before this court. It is not for this bench to decide who loved more or who failed hardest. But it is within our power to recognize when truth has been withheld, and to acknowledge the damage that deception brings. Kody looked up for the first time. His eyes were tired, red-rimmed, but still defiant in that small, lost way. The judge continued, Mr. Brown, this letter, your actions, and your silence have caused lasting emotional harm. What was once a family became a battlefield. What should have been faith turned into favor. And in this courtroom there are no winners, only those brave enough to face what was buried. He turned toward Janelle. You may never find the closure you're searching for here. But you've given your children something stronger than a verdict. You've given them honesty. A soft murmur rippled through the gallery. Cameras zoomed in, pens scratched on paper. The world outside the